So Republicans are now officially in control of the House of Representatives, and there was a little bit of an open question when the negotiations were going on, when the debate was going on. Hey, what are they actually going to fight for? What are they going to vote on? You know, it was a little bit up in the air. We had a general idea, but now we know for sure. So there was a whole list of concessions that McCarthy made to Matt Gaetz and, you know, his little ragtag group, things that you have to vote on this in order for us to, you know, to give you our vote. And those things were honestly standard Tea Party ideas. And so one of the things involved, like, you know, border security. We need to make sure we do border security stuff. Another thing was to raise any taxes, you need 3/5 majority, which frankly is insane. I mean, that's insane. Something like 70% of the American population wants to raise taxes on the wealthy, and they've now made that functionally impossible. So, you know, populist my ass cheeks. These are guys who have a populist posture and who fight in a faux populist way, but their agenda is as pro-establishment as possible. Well, now they're ripping the mask off because a bunch of these Republicans went on Fox News, went on various news outlets, and they tried to make one thing crystal clear. Hey, that one decent thing that we negotiated, you know, some defense cuts, that's the one thing we're not actually going to do that. So the one good thing that was in our list of demands, we actually don't want that. We're not going to fight for that. We're not going to do that. The real cuts we want to do, it's domestically. Well, you know what that means. So let's listen to some of their commentary here, and then I'll break it down as we go.
Now, there are a number of them, half a dozen prominent ones, but the one that seems to be sticking across some of your more moderate colleagues is this notion that, you know, you have a budget this year that should be the same next year. You want it to make it the same. But with population growth and inflation, as you know, Congressman, many of your moderate colleagues say, well, that would be akin to a cut in, for example, defense. And that would not be welcome, and the back and forth on that. Is that a drop-dead issue to you?
Well, the real test for us, as you know, Neil, will be when the debt ceiling situation arises. When we reach the debt limit, we've got to have the willingness to go to the mat over that, to force cuts in spending, to put us on a path to fiscal responsibility. We've got to use the leverage that we will have at that time. Because, as you know, the omnibus bill was passed, unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago. We've lost all of our budgetary leverage through September, but we will regain that in the debt ceiling battle when we have that soon. And the full faith and credit of the U.S. government is on the line for us to cut spending so we don't face a reckoning someday because of the rise in interest rates and the rapidly rise in our national debt. So we've got to show courage. That was on display here in this Congress. I would say historically over the past week, we've got to continue to display that courage to fight to save the country from a fiscal standpoint.
So just to decode what he's saying there, and by the way, what he's saying is correct, but in the opposite way of what he thinks. So he says, oh, the full faith and credit of the U.S. government is on the line here. That's right. And if you do the thing you want to do, it'll destroy the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. So the debt limit is an arbitrary cap. And the reason why it's total bunk, good word, is because that's about money we've already spent. So the real question here is the U.S. going to be good on its word? If you destroy that and you tell the world no, well, guess what? That has massive consequences. Our rating as a country plummets. Nobody would ever want to do any kind of business with us, and you immediately plunge us into a recession and or depression. So what they're talking about here, we've seen this before, guys. In fact, there was actually a great documentary. It was on, I think, PBS Frontline, and it's available on YouTube if you want to check it out. It's about the debt limit fight, the debt ceiling fight that happened under Obama. There was President Obama, there was John Boehner, was, you know, the person he was negotiating with, who was Speaker of the House at the time. And John Boehner was also dealing with these upstarts on the right flank of him. And it was Eric Cantor and some others. And Eric Cantor and the others were taking this position that this guy's, you know, putting out there, which is, no, we're going to demand cuts domestically. And what that means is screw over working people by, you know, destroying or reducing the few programs they actually like. And so you have this game of chicken, where, you know, the Democrats control the Senate and the presidency, so effectively Biden can veto whatever the hell he wants. But what are the Republicans going to actually agree to get through the House of Representatives? Because they're going to need to get something through the House of Representatives to eventually become law. And it's like, well, what do you do? Well, in that fight that happened back then in the 2010s, you had Obama and Biden actually agree to some cuts in Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. But what happened was the Tea Party at the time said, no, that doesn't go far enough. So we're going to destroy that. And as a direct result of that, we actually avoided the cuts to Social Security and Medicare, which is astonishing. It's because these people were so extreme, they wouldn't accept a win when they had it. And so eventually, I don't even remember how they ended up totally, averting the crisis, but they ended up raising the debt limit, and they didn't touch the Social Security and Medicare, but there were, like other things that were on the table and other things that were potentially cut. And Obama had to back off of certain tax increases that he was arguing for. He had to raise the threshold that you raise taxes. Anyway, so this is just one example here. We're just getting started. Let's watch this one.
In the spending approach, you've got the discretionary spending that involves both this out-of-control domestic spending since before the pandemic under Nancy Pelosi, and you've got defense spending. And the argument is this would affect defense spending, which I'm here to tell you guys, Republicans will not impact defense spending aside from efficiencies and waste. It's the domestic spending that we're going to go after.
Yes.
In the spending.
One admission. He says that like he's so proud of it. He says that like everybody would agree with what I'm about to say here. No, only in your little bubble in Washington, D.C. do people agree with that. Only because your best friends are defense contractors who you give smooth hand jobs to at night. They're the ones who agree with that. Look at what he's arguing for there. He's saying, we're not going to touch defense. We're not going to touch defense, we promise. Because they think, oh my God, that's a political third rail. It's not. There was a story that just came out. The Pentagon failed 5 audits in a row. 5 in a row. They can't account for 59% of their funds. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars missing. We're talking about we wasted $7 trillion when all is said and done in Iraq, over $2 trillion in Afghanistan. There were the Afghanistan papers that came out, which found that all of the spending we did there was rife with waste, fraud, and abuse. It effectively, it's like lighting that money on fire would have been of better use. And these people act like, bro, Americans will not stand for defense cuts. We spend more than the next 10 biggest countries combined, and most of them are our allies. We have 900 military bases all around the world. This, like, the amount of money we spent on war is absurd. It's absurd, and it's because of the corruption, because of the defense contractors, Raytheon, Boeing, etc., that Honeywell, they give money to these politicians, and the politicians return the favor. They give them these no-bid contracts, and you got thousands of tanks sitting in the desert in Nevada just collecting dust because, warfare is our welfare in this country. And this guy says, we're not going to touch that. We're not going to touch that. Don't worry, we're not going to touch that. Well, that's the one thing we want you to touch. I want you to cut the military budget 50%, because even if you cut it 50%, we're still the biggest military in the world by far and away. By far and away. So no, he's like, oh, don't worry, we're not going to touch that. We're only going to touch domestic programs. Oh, you mean the most popular programs in the entire country? Is that what you mean? And the answer is yes, that is what he means. I got one more here for you.
Now, Congressman, should military spending cuts be on the table and put on the table by a Republican?
Well, look, I agree with Jim Jordan that we are going to carve out woke policies out of the military. We are going to look at the out-of-whack ratio of generals. I invite him to come on the Armed Services Committee and work with us on that. But, Stu, and by the way, I'm all for a balanced budget. We've got to get spending under control, but we are not going to do it on the backs of our troops and our military, when at the same time we're talking about China is the greatest threat. We're going to have a select committee on China. They're tripling their nuclear arsenal. Iran is racing towards a nuke. North Korea is about to launch an ICBM. Russia is on the march. And, oh, by the way, we still have a global terrorist state now in Afghanistan, thanks to Joe Biden. So this is, we can work on prioritizing defense spending, but that's really nibbling around the margins. Okay. If we really want to talk about the debt and spending, it's the entitlements program. That's 70% of our entire budget. That $1.7 trillion and defense within that is only 30%. So if we want to talk about big reforms, I look forward to hearing that from those folks who are pushing towards a balanced budget.
The reason why I like this idiot the most is because he dropped all the coded language. He just went right to it. He was like, no, we're not going to cut the military. We'll get rid of the woke stuff in the military. Oh, you're so brave. You're so brave. Because that's the real crisis, is that there's like a couple trans people in the military and maybe some lesbians who climbed the chain of command or whatever. Like, the idea that this is your main critique of U.S. empire is like, bro, LGBTQIA stuff and whatnot, they're destroying us. They're destroying us, bro. Like, what is this? What is this? So, not going to touch military spending. Oh, how brave of you. How brave. But what we really have to go after is entitlements. So what does that mean? That means Social Security, Medicare, and potentially Medicaid as well. Definitely Social Security and Medicare. Those programs are the most popular programs in the country. Those programs are beloved. Now, he calls them entitlement programs, and he says that in a derisive way. It has a negative connotation, the way he says it. It's pejorative, the way he says it. But guess what? There's a reason why they're called entitlement programs. Because you are entitled to them, because people pay into this their entire lives, and then when they retire, when they hit a certain age, it's like, well, you're going to get back what you put in. And the whole idea about Social Security and Medicare is that, look, this money in particular is basically going to go into a lockbox, and it's going to be safe. It's not part of the rest of the budgetary process that we have to re-up on a yearly basis. And so that's protected. And so, you're good. You're good. Like, this is for you. And that's why these programs are popular. Because if you're going to prioritize what to do with a government, at the top of the list would be like, maybe let's make sure grandma's not starving in the street and she dies. Maybe make sure grandma has health care, because, it turns out that the private market is really not going to do the job right, because they care first and foremost about profit. And it turns out old people, you can't really turn that much of a profit off of them because they have a lot of health problems. This is like thing number one on the list. Yeah, give grandma and grandpa a little bit of money and make sure they have health care. These programs have been wildly successful. I forget the specific numbers, but it was something like 30 or 35% of seniors lived in poverty before Social Security, and then it dropped all the way to 10% because of just Social Security. And these guys are like, well, we have to cut it. And by the way, just so you know, they will go back to using weasel language. So instead of saying, we're going to cut these programs, what they're going to say is, oh, we need to reform these programs to save them. That's what they'll say. And they'll also give you bogus numbers. They like to say stuff like, by the year 2045, these programs are going to be bankrupt. And sometimes they even say sooner than that. By 2032, they'll be bankrupt. And then guess what? That's not true, because every time they go back and do that analysis, they always push the date back further and further and further. I've been hearing this since like the 1990s. They used to be like, by 1998, this program will be bankrupt. And by the way, the other thing is, when they say bankrupt, they don't even mean like, oh, hey, we're out of money. No, they just mean like, oh, it'll only pay out 77% of the benefits that it currently pays out. And it's like, okay, sounds to me like you could do some minor fixes in order to fully fund it into the future. So, for example, the idea that's been floated on the left for a very, very long time by Bernie Sanders and by others. In fact, this is even a position of many establishment Democrats. You don't even need to be a firebrand lefty to take this position. They say, just lift the cap on the Social Security tax, and then it's funded as far as the eye can see. So in other words, right now, and I'm giving rough numbers here because it's been a while since I read the exact income threshold, but right now, like, basically you're only taxed for Social Security on your first like $140,000 that you make per year. So in other words, you could have, let's say there's some doctor, some physician who makes $135,000 a year. They pay the same raw number, actual number in Social Security tax as like LeBron James, who makes whatever, $20 million a year. I'm making that number up too, by the way. I don't know how much he makes per year. But like, it's the exact same amount they pay. One person makes $140,000 a year. The other one makes $20 million a year. They pay the same amount. Well, all you have to do is lift that cap, that arbitrary cap at $140,000. So in other words, tax the wealthy just a little bit more, tax them the same percentage. You don't even need to raise the percentage. You could tax them the same percent just on their entire income, and then you'd fund Social Security as far as the eye can see. So another thing they're going to put on the table, let's raise the retirement age. This is what they're going to put on the table. These ideas are despised. They are hated. Guys, when they tell you who they are, believe them. So now the one decent thing they were talking about, a tiny cut to military spending, they're immediately backing off of that. Look, I'll make a prediction right now. Not only are they not going to cut the military, they're going to increase funding for it. And then the Democrats in the Senate are going to approve that, and then Biden's going to sign it. That's what's going to happen. They're going to increase military spending. I guarantee you. So the military cuts off the table, even though you could really cut back there. They're going to come for the most popular programs in the country. They're telling you what they're going to do. So look, just everybody do me a favor. This is super important. I hope everybody listens to me on this. if you hear anybody, ever, anywhere, say, oh, Republicans are being populist, immediately shut them down. Nothing has ever been further from the truth. These are, in fact, the firebrand, right flank of the Republican Party that's aligned with the former Tea Party, now called the Freedom Caucus. They are even more pro-establishment than the establishment Republican wing. I need you to understand that. That's super important. So they have the aesthetics of being firebrand populists. But in terms of their actual political agenda, they are a massive cuck to capital, to corporations, to the donor class, to special interests. And, look, I don't know if they're ignorant suckers or if they're in on the game and they know what they're doing. But either way, totally unacceptable. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.